pros and cons of working remotely. I think you said already maybe one of the buried cons, and it's not a big deal. We live in a responsive world. Is you're always connected. Kind of is a simple way to say it. But from a standpoint of not necessarily efficiency, because obviously if you don't have to drive into a central location and do a task that you could accomplish from home or from a remote connection, this question is more of when I'm at home using my system remotely, is it fast? Is it quick? Is there a noticeable speed difference than if I'm, say, sitting here at the office on my network here?
You're definitely going to see some degradation. I don't think there's any ifs, ands, or buts about that. You see a little bit of a delay, but not an overly big delay that would keep you from working efficiently. But there is a hesitancy a little bit, but I think that's been overblown. I think at this point, when you think about speed, I think you kind of have to think about it in two ways. One is the place that you're getting the remote session from, optimized to serve up those remote desktops, the RDP sessions. So that's your first layer. Is that PC going to be able to handle the number of users and the processing speed that needs to be up there? I'll give you an example. A buddy of mine here in Idaho works for Idaho Power, and when the pandemic hit, they went remote. Well, their current servers that they manage in-house, were kind of optimized for about 80 people to be on a remote session at any given time.
That's big,
because they're working remotely, right? And then pandemic hit, and all of a sudden they had 500 people that needed to be on that box. So speed went through the floor because they just weren't ready for that amount of people to be up on that session. So you got to think about that first layer. The second layer is the bandwidth that's coming out, the pipeline that's coming out, which is typically at a business, the pipeline is nice and big, right? So you're getting a big internet bandwidth, and it's going to serve you as fast as you can take it. Well, then the third layer is, where are you at home and what are you connected to? Are you on a hotspot, which is the slowest thing possible, or are you on a cable modem, or are you on DSL? And what's your pipeline? So if your pipe's small and your business is big, it's going to taper down, and so you got to think of those three layers to make it the most effective. But if you have reasonable processor, reasonable bandwidth, and reasonable bandwidth on your side, the speed should be, essentially like you're sitting in your office without any big degradation.
We use a hosting provider, so quite often we find ourselves offsite, and I can speak, individually and say that I've never ran into an issue. Now, I don't necessarily use the Sage portion as intensely, but for all my other programs, when we say fast, like, that's a good point. It's relative, right? So no, that's extremely helpful. That's a good point, a good starting point that most folks may not even think about. But I've heard about printing, regardless of whether or not you've got a robust pipeline and all the above. What about printing? If somebody's going to do a lot of that offsite.
To kind of wrap up that topic on number one as well, when you think about a product like Acumatica, who's kind of built for that browser, I think you do inherently see some efficiency gain. Still so far, though it is drastically changed from even a couple years ago. The speed of entering something in a browser-based interface versus a desktop interface, that continues to get way better. But I guess I always use the analogy, we all have, many of us are on Office 365, and do you like running Outlook on your desktop, or do you like running Outlook on the browser? And most people a long time ago chose the desktop because of speed. If you revisit Outlook on the browser, you'll notice that the efficiency and the speed and performance has greatly been enhanced over the last couple of years. But but there is still maybe a misconception of browser-based solutions aren't as fast, but they are, and I would say that's still the case. It's just the amount of speed is so minuscule now that it doesn't matter.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the pandemic likely expedited that whole scenario. So
yeah,
all good points.
So back to your question about printing.
Yeah, sorry to jump ahead. I get excited.
No, you're good. So I think when you think about printing's always been a challenge remotely. I mean, it's definitely been a big hurdle. There's a couple different ways to really optimize printing, but that is definitely a place where you see some degradation. You know, we're used to hitting print, and for the most part, instantaneously getting the printer to fire off. And when you're in an RDP session, it's got to create the image or the file. It's got to transport that file to your PC to push to your printer. So you see typically a 5-second delay between hitting print and seeing that printer light up.
Okay.
So you see, and that is, again, there's a lot of variables in there around bandwidth and processing speed and whatnot, but you'll see a delay there. There's just no doubt about it. We've worked with a couple different solutions, namely a product called TS Print, which really helps that performance get better. There's different scenarios that it really helps, especially when you're dealing with odd shaped documents like an 8.5 by 14, bigger document spans, and that helps. And you see more of an instantaneous print job coming through. Cuts that 5 seconds down to 2.5 or 2. There's a cost behind it, but it's definitely a place you'll see some degradation. It continues to get better, but you just got to walk in eyes wide open. There's a cost to be paid a little bit for their remote activity.
As we're talking, I'm seeing a couple of things. First, if you're working remotely, you're likely, in some scenarios, you may be printing heavily and still mailing those invoices or documents or whatnot. But right there, you could use the paperless office feature, right? And that's Sage specific. But I guess there's more than just TS Print. There's some other ways that you could go about it, but it doesn't sound like it's a terribly long extension from what you're used to. So that doesn't really sound like something that would probably be as big of an issue as security. Jeremy, we live in a very active online world. We say this all the time. Customer experience, you want to get back to people as quickly as possible, but you don't want to sacrifice the security of your infrastructure just to be able to do that, right? So how about working remotely? Talk to us a little bit about security, if you would.
Yeah, and when I look at security, especially as we watch what's going on in the world, and there's a concern, especially today, at a heightened level.
Yeah.
When you look at security, a couple of questions come to mind. How secure are you? We've had a number of clients this year that have been hit by crypto locking and ransomware, and that can just take you down, instantaneously, and they're going to hold you ransom for, a couple of thousand Bitcoin or, whatever their currency that they're trying to get from you. We had a client a couple years ago in the dairy industry that delivers milk, and they got crypto locked. They found out quickly that they didn't have a good backup, which is definitely key, and didn't have a good disaster recovery plan. They were using what is it called? The remote solution that takes backups and pushes them up. Carbonite.
Yeah, sure.
They were taking that level of security and backup disaster recovery on their own plate, and no one had ever tested it. And so they came to find out, after they got locked, they found that they didn't have a good backup of their server. So for close to 3 weeks, their entire system was locked down. Luckily, they had some ability. This was when I was with the previous company. We had some ability to kind of keep business rolling, but and penting up a lot of transactions. But it created a nightmare of a mess to administer.
Backlog.
Yeah, backlog of keeping up and resetting the server up, and it ended up costing them $6,000 in crypto coin to get out of it. Where and that was after they negotiated down from 40 grand. And so it really creates a nightmare. So at a minimum, what I would suggest in that environment is, or in that experience is, make sure you have a good backup, make sure you have a good disaster plan, and test that disaster plan.
Back to the backup. Yep.
When you look at going to a hosted solution that's managed, whether that be Summit, go to my ERP, or doing it on your own inside of Amazon or Google, or using someone that is managing it for you, this is a place where that becomes one of the major things you're paying for.
Got it. Makes
is
sense.
that Google's not going to allow someone to penetrate their wall, right? I mean, it's going to be, and they're going to have you so isolated inside of that wall that if for some reason someone does get to you, you most likely have an image off-site, and they can turn around and up another image and put you back to square, at a short amount of time, and maybe a day behind the curve. So that's one thing you're really paying for when you go to that environment. I think when you think about doing it yourself, are you keeping up with, and I know I close mine down a lot, which is, I have McAfee loaded and I never subscribe, so I get the notification.
Yeah.
Really want to move forward, because we have different solutions. I say yes, 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 and part of me is praying that we have a different solution, right? So
right.
But what security, depending on where you're at, if you're doing it yourself, you're as secure as you feel comfortable maintaining that level. When you move to a hosted platform, they've got a lot more at stake to lose for security, so they're going to put those measures in place. And probably the biggest key out of this thing is make sure you have a good, solid disaster recovery plan and test it. Test it at least one time a year if you can afford to do that, at a minimum.
And that's pretty much regardless of whether you're going to work remotely or not, right? Just do it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's
definitely
the best way you can help yourself. Yep.
Yeah, there's definitely a security becomes a little bit of a different play, or the sense of urgency, because you're dealing with people like me that are on a home network, and I may not be as secure in my home network as the business is, but I'm accessing the business. And so, whether that be putting VPNs in place so that it's tunneled, or, making sure that I'm only doing things through RDP on the terminal server, again, maybe through a VPN that really kind of makes that connection secure and clear. There's different measures. We're definitely at Matrix not the technical body to really say what the best thing is. That's an IT group that would do that. But just playing our experience, you definitely want to make sure that you know what that plan is.